Due Process, recipient of 6 Mid-Atlantic Emmy Awards.
They have been segregated, they have been separated and kept together.
It was New Jersey's version of Jim Crow in the classroom until Princeton schools were desegregated. That was more than 50 years ago. But what about growing resegregation in the rest of New Jersey? Schools and race in Princeton and throughout the state on this special edition of Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process is made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding is provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual.
Some thought it was settled in 1954 when Brown versus the Board of Education said no to separate but equal schools. And laws designed to keep black and white kids separate within a district are no longer allowed. But more than 50 years later, segregated classrooms in New Jersey and throughout this country are far from gone. In fact, a Harvard study warns we're in the throes of resegregation, with New Jersey leading the way. I'm Raymond Brown, and on this special edition of Due Process, we look at school segregation, past and present, by law and despite law, denounced and de facto. We'll talk to state and national experts about the causes and cures for racial imbalance in schools today. But what better place to start than yesterday in one of New Jersey's most prestigious towns, where the shame of Jim Crow schools is a not-so-distant memory, and the plan for integration remains a source of pride. Sandy King is here to fill in the blank. Sandy?
Freeman, the town is posh and pretty Princeton, where Jim Crow schools were an ugly fact of law until something happened in Trenton. In 1947, a new state constitution with a prohibition on segregated schools. And 1 year later, the Princeton response. The Witherspoon School for Colored Children would no longer be all black. Its counterpart no longer all white. And more than half a century later, implementation of the Princeton Plan still looms large in local history, local memory. So the Princeton Committee of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund sought to get it down on tape. With the help of our colleague, producer Damon Williams, here then, the result.
Well, that's when, you have these two schools, and one of them's black and one of them's white, and you mix the student body and the faculty. That's the Princeton plan. I said, oh, you mean that's what they did when I was in 5th grade.
It seemed to have been a very smooth plan. In fact, it happened before you knew it.
Unless you had children who were in those schools, you probably didn't notice it too much.
The whole process, to me, the way I see things, was wrong from the beginning. I think that neighborhood schools should have never been broken up.
It was a good feeling because I think most of us in the whole picture felt that it was the right thing to do, that we were making a step forward. It just didn't seem to make sense to have an integrated high school and have a segregated elementary school.
We were joking about something in class one time, and the student said, "Look at Shirley blush." And I remember the teacher saying in class, "Shirley can't blush, Negroes don't blush." So there were little comments like that that, let us know that we were different.
The Princeton community itself had a feeling, not just the school system, but the whole community, that it had reached a point where we needed to work together. And I think the whole community made a real effort to make the plan work.
There were 81 members in the Constitutional Convention. 8 of them were women. Only one was an African American, and that was Delegate Randolph from Essex County. And it was, I think, very largely through his influence, his insistence, that a very liberal civil rights plank, if you will, was inserted in the Constitution of 1947.
My opinion is that the convention wants to go on record as favoring the broadest clause against discrimination, against race, color, or national origin.
Article 1, paragraph 5 prohibits racial segregation in 2 important areas of, if you will, the public life of the state. Segregation in public schools is forbidden, and segregation in the state militia is forbidden.
It was a very important provision and one that was swiftly implemented. As of 1947, for example, we still had segregated schools in New Jersey. In the southern counties of the state, in Princeton, even in Englewood, New Jersey, segregated schools.
It is the first state constitution in the Union that prohibits racial discrimination in the state militia and in public schools. And that sent out a, if you will, a death knell to such discriminations in other state constitutions. I should also say that in a sense, the whole world was watching New Jersey in 47. One guy we know who was watching New Jersey was Thurgood Marshall. Thurgood Marshall, around this period of time, was beginning the long process which would lead to the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954, the Supreme Court decision. Because New Jersey desegregated its schools, the NAACP could argue, and it argued well, that desegregation of schools was in keeping with the spirit of American democracy. It was in keeping with the spirit of the United States Constitution, and the court could point to New Jersey as an example of a state that voluntarily desegregated its schools, and it did so without racial havoc.
In 1948, there were 2,000 students in the Princeton schools. 11% of the students were black. In Princeton's segregated school system, the borough had 2 elementary schools about 9 blocks apart. The black school was Witherspoon, and the white school was Nassau. The township, a large rural area that surrounded the small developed borough, also had 2 elementary schools, but it paid the borough to educate all of its black elementary students. In response to the constitutional mandate, the Township Board of Education announced in early March of 1948 that they would stop sending their black elementary students to the Witherspoon School. The township's decision is said to have hastened the borough's plan to desegregate its schools, and the superintendent, along with the Board of Education, moved fast, giving no time for opposition to develop.
It's acted at the beginning like an ordinary PTA meeting, and then the president announced that the Board of Education of the Princeton Borough Schools, it was not a regional school district at the time, had voted to effect an integration between the then colored school and the then white school. It started out rather quietly, and then it got a little tense because there were people who said, this action is going too fast. They should have been more slowly. They should have acted more slowly. There was no reason for hurry, but there were those who felt they could have dragged their feet a little bit and maybe educated the public a little more, because most people hadn't heard anything about this possibility, or if they'd heard, they thought it was somewhere in the future, and maybe their children would have graduated from school before it got done. So there was some tension, and there were certain people who were quite deeply shocked and horrified at the thought of their children having to go into the John Witherspoon area. This was the Nassau Street PTA, you understand. So it was all white folk. Some of us felt that a PTA meeting should get over with pretty soon, so I said, I move that the Nassau Street PTA endorse the action of the Board of Education in making this plan to integrate the schools. And it passed with a few dissenting votes. The majority thought it was a fine decision and were all for what the Board of Education had done. There were a few people who didn't want to speak to me for some years afterward. The Board of Education, during the course of the summer, had several open houses at both schools, at the Nassau Street School and the Quarry Street School, and invited parents to come and take a tour of the school, meet teachers, so that parents both from the John Witherspoon area who had not maybe known anything much about the Nassau Street School had the opportunity to see it and to meet the teachers, all the teachers. And the reverse happened also. That is, parents who probably had never ventured down Witherspoon Street as far as Quarry Street had that experience and found that it was a very nice school.
Press coverage of the integration process by the local papers was sketchy at best. They used the terms centralization, reorganization, and changes, not integration or desegregation. Only one paper explained that colored children would now be going to the same schools as white children.
The superintendent of schools and I, and also Howard Waxwood, who was the principal of the Witherspoon School, sometimes called the Quarry Street School, we visited several civic groups in the community, such as the Rotary Club and the Kiwanis Club, several church groups along the way, where we discussed this whole matter. And I might add that the spirit and the kind of questions that were asked at these occasions were not in the least bit antagonistic. It was almost as though this is being accepted, and it's a good thing that should be done.
The people, the government realized that there was inferiority being placed upon us, and enough in government had the conscience to say, let's change it and give the blacks a better opportunity.
There were questions at that time by people in our black community about their little children having to walk a greater distance to get to their elementary school. It was in their own backyard at that particular time. And so there was some reluctance on the part of our black parents because of the safety factor. And there was also another thing that I think is very important here. The teachers in the Witherspoon School were loved by the parents and by their principal and highly respected. And they felt that they were losing something by having their teachers, so to speak, taken away from the home ground.
The Negro parents were concerned about how their children would be treated, how the white teachers would treat them, and how the white students, what could they expect? They had been segregated, they had been separated and kept together. They had a fear of being rejected. And I think that through all of this, he tried as best he could to prepare them. To him, this was important that he tried to get those young people, those students and teachers to understand what was happening, and that it was not going to be a very easy situation. It was going to be one of give and take, of compromise, but of trying to understand that being a part of this was going to mean the welfare of all concerned.
Some of our white parents, they were wondering whether it would really downgrade, in effect, some of the academic standards of the school. However, the interesting part of that is, and that we kept very careful records on that, and we found that actually that our Stanford achievement tests were showing better results in the integrated school system than they were in the segregated school system. So that was one of the pluses, I think, in the whole movement.
Now the two segregated elementary schools, Nassau and Witherspoon, were integrated. All the younger black and white students, kindergarten through 5th grade, were assigned to the formerly white Nassau school, and all the 6th through 8th graders were assigned to the formerly black Witherspoon school.
The first day when I went to school, I noticed that the students weren't very receptive to us. I was kind of nervous because I didn't understand why we were changing schools. The concept wasn't given to us as students, it was only given to the parents and the people in the community. You know, I just noticed that we were different. And that's the first time, as I said, that I noticed what segregation was when they integrated the schools. Because we were clearly, we weren't told that we were different, but we were treated differently. The teachers did not discipline us the same when we went to Nassau Street School. We saw it as a lack of caring because it wasn't the same type of caring that we had before we left Witherspoon.
Our teachers, I knew ever since as a kid because they lived in the neighborhood. They were at the house. They were in the church. They were really concerned about us. We were just like a big family. And when we got to Nassau Street School, I got the impression that we were just about ignored. I know we used to compete among ourselves. We weren't asked to answer questions.
I was assigned to Mrs. Scruggs' class, who was the black teacher who'd come over to take the other section of 5th grade. But she turned out to be one of the greatest teachers I've had. I have been blessed with many, many really incredible teachers. She was one of the best. She was incredibly caring, nurturing. She listened. She heard what you had to say. She was encouraging. I particularly remember about her that she encouraged. She was the first person who encouraged me to write. I wrote a piece for one of her classes, and she actually called my mother to tell her how splendid she thought this piece of writing was. Well, to me, good writing up until that was penmanship, and I had terrible penmanship. I was totally puzzled by her thinking that this piece of writing was good, because it was the same penmanship that I'd always had, but of course she meant something quite different from that. In 1973, I published a book. I dedicated it to her.
A teacher, Mr. Horner, a music teacher, singled me out in the class to sing Shortland Bread. And I refused, and I guess we had some words, and he sent me back to the principal's office. And Mr. Waxwood and I had a long, long talk, and he just told me about integration and about experiences that I would have in life. And I'll never forget the things that he sat down and talked to me about. He told me that subconsciously white people don't realize at times what they're doing and how you feel about things?
Because after all, Mr. Waxworth himself, as a student in the school system here in Princeton, New Jersey, was rejected, was humiliated. But through it all, he kept fighting. He didn't give up. And I think that was what he tried to get those students to keep going and not to give up, not to feel that there's no hope, but always feel that tomorrow will be a better day.
There was good chemistry between Howard and me, and we knew we had a big job on our hands and that it was going to rise or fall pretty much on our shoulders one way or the other. So, it was a happy experience as I look back on it all.
It was still a Jim Crow town, though. I mean, and Princeton always had that aura. But ever since Paul Robeson's time, when he had gone to school for colored children, when it was on Witherspoon Street, he said that phrase that Princeton is the southernmost northern town. And we still knew that we had to stay in our place. It's just that because of the times, the integration took place in Princeton. But I think some people still had their same views because there were places we couldn't go. There were restaurants we couldn't go into even though the schools were integrated.
Blacks and whites were mixed in the Princeton schools in 1948, and lives were changed. But the integration process in the Princeton schools did not become commonly known as the Princeton Plan until the 60s, when a New Jersey newspaper published the first of many articles on desegregation in Princeton.
I don't care where you went, it was Princeton Plan. So naturally, we felt proud to be a part of something of that plan that everybody is picking up on. That we must have been doing, it must have been something good because it spread and other cities took on some phase of the Princeton Plan.
The education, for some reason, seemed to go down a little bit when they integrated the schools. And it was especially felt in the high school because we were tracked. We were tracked in general, business, industrial, and academic. And for whatever reason, we were not put in the academic classes. Our parents had to come and tell them that we wanted to be an academic and be prepared for college.
This was one of the most rewarding and profound experiences in my life because it helped me to get to know black people and black children in a way that I might not have done otherwise. It was like a breath of fresh air to see all this thing coming together with good people of goodwill.
The Witherspoon Street School, after the integration, was really quite a good community of both African American and white kids in many ways.
I still feel as though I was cheated out of a lot by being a part of that plan.
I was pleased, amused, proud of Princeton for, having been a pioneer in this.
In the integrated school system, all of the children would have books, they would have writing materials, they would have teachers teaching courses that were not taught in his school. So he had a feeling that this had to be better. If for no other reason that every child had a good book and didn't have a second-hand one that had come down from another school, but had the same kinds of material, the same books, the same pencils, the same drawing material. If for no other reason, he felt that his students, that those students were getting what they had missed in a segregated school.
And so, more than 50 years later, the integration of Princeton schools remains a watershed in the lives of those who made it happen. Two of them whom we saw on screen we welcome here now. Shirley Satterfield was a second-grade student when the colored school became an integrated school. Chester Stroup was the principal when the Nassau School stopped being white only. I know I'm asking you both to look back more than 50 years, but we heard you talk about what happened. I wonder if you could talk a little more, Shirley first, about how it felt to have that happen. When you were first told that you're not going to be going to the Witherspoon School anymore, and in fact you are not going to be in a school for colored children, do you remember what that felt like?
I really don't remember being told that I was going to another school. I just went. I don't remember anyone sitting down and telling me you will now be going to Nassau Street School.
And was there a shock of recognition when you looked around and realized?
It was a shock of recognition when I went to the school, because that's when I felt different. And it wasn't so much the students, it was the teachers who I don't think were sensitized to the fact that there was going to be integration in the school. So therefore, the teachers were the ones who let me know that I was different.
So it wasn't just that you looked around and said, everyone I'm with is not like me any longer. It's that you were actually treated differently, not as well.
That's true.
Chet, you were the principal. Does that sound right?
I think that is true in some cases, although I think by and large the white faculty did welcome the integration of the schools.
Theoretically, but didn't quite know what to do?
Yes, I think that's part of it. There were some ties between the Nassau Street School and the Witherspoon School. We did share special teachers in music, art, physical education, and science. You will remember Miss Compton Shirley and some of the other people that were on the staff. So these were white teachers on the staff who worked in both the Witherspoon School and in the Nassau Street School.
But we heard Shirley now, we heard Henry Pinnell in the tape piece say that there was something very uncomfortable.
Well, you know,
were you aware of it at the time, and was it something that you knew was a problem? And I'm wondering if you could think 40 and 30 and 20 years back. Is it something that improved?
Let me give you an example. Dr. Strout, I remember, because he understood and he was there for us. There was a teacher that I had in third grade, and we had a little play. It was a little Dutch play, and my partner was a white student. The day before the play was to be given, the student that my partner was changed, and it was a black student. That's when I realized, oh, we're separated. You know, even though we're in the same school, we can't be together. That part was an eye-opener for me.
Pinnell said he felt cheated. Did you?
I didn't feel cheated, no. I just felt different, and I couldn't figure out what the difference was. I just know that why am I treated differently than all the other students, or why are we as black students treated differently?
Had the Witherspoon School been a nurturing and warm, familial kind of place for you?
Very much so, because the teachers were part of the community. They went to our churches, they came to our homes, they were there to nurture us. So we didn't have that same kind of feeling when the schools were integrated.
So you had the basis of comparison. Black students who've come after you all these years, of course, have not. Do you think it was easier for them? As you'll see, we'll roll in a little while, we did a very unscientific survey on the streets of Princeton asking kids, older people, white and black, do you think that the Princeton plan was a success? And what we heard from black students again and again was, we're not treated the same. Now, today, in Princeton schools, do you believe that, Chet?
I'm sorry.
Do you think that black students are correct in feeling that somehow they're not treated quite as well as white students even today?
Well, I think probably Shirley could answer that question better than I, because she worked as a guidance counselor at the high school. And
until 2 years ago, you were in Princeton High School.
Exactly. Yeah.
Are those kids right?
Partially, they are right. Yes, But I think it also has to do with the fact that the education is there, but we don't always take advantage of the education. And also, I think it's because some of the students are stigmatized when they're in elementary school, or they're put in special education classes, and as much is not expected of them. So by the time they get to the high school, they aren't in the academic courses. And even though we're not tracked as we were when I was in school, they tend not to take the academic courses.
Well, we kept hearing, when we talk to kids on the street, that black kids are not in the accelerated classes. Is that self-selection or is that steering?
That comes from the lower grades. It doesn't come, they don't all of a sudden get to high school and they're not put in academic courses. It's because the background somehow has been lost by the time that they get to the high school.
You know, I'm fascinated by the fact that Princeton, which one would think in an ideal world would be the most civilized place in New Jersey, here it is home to one of the world's most important seats of learning, was perhaps New Jersey's most uncivilized town in this respect, in that the rest of New Jersey had really let at least segregated schools go. There was still plenty of racism on the streets of every town and city in New Jersey. But by 1948, you guys were probably alone at having a school that you would call the school for colored children, and making sure that the colored children were, in fact, separated from the white children. How do we understand this looking back more than 50 years? Should we have expected more from Princeton?
Yes, I think so. I think one of the problems which I indicated on the original video that we did of the Princeton plan, I think there was a little bit of concern, unjustified, on the part of white folks that academic standards might be lowered as a result of the integration. And I think that was in the mind of a lot of white people. But as it turned out, that wasn't the case. We kept accurate records on achievement tests and so on, and actually the grades continue to rise rather than fall. So the integration was doing something very special, I think, for the white children as well as the black children.
And Princeton has, I've been looking at the numbers for the elementary schools, has remained surprisingly, perhaps, given the way market forces tend to lead to de facto segregation, surprisingly well integrated, roughly 10% of the kids in each of the elementary schools being black. But I wonder, for both of you, as you look back now, do you call the Princeton plan a success? Is it a success with caveat? And if somebody came to the two of you and said, you're the experts, you've been on the ground with this subject, give us guidance. The rest of New Jersey and the rest of America needs your guidance. Do we try to desegregate the rest of the country? Or, in fact, there are other strategies that some people think are more legitimate. Do we worry about thorough and efficient? Do we worry about improving standards? Or do we keep thinking of desegregation as an important part of making education better for black kids and white kids?
Yes, I think we do. And I'm very happy to say that from where I see it, I've been retired a long time, I do see a greater appreciation, and I'm concerned about the fact that Princeton was so slow in getting around to this. When I came to Princeton as an elementary school principal in 1946, I was shocked to find that there was not only segregation in the schools, but segregation in restaurants and the street. So,
unfortunately true probably throughout much of the state. It was the schools that really made you different. But right now, Chet, you're on a special presidential commission and they say, Chet, guide us. Should desegregation still be the rallying cry?
Yes, I think it should be. There's no question about it. And I think one of the mistakes that we made along the way on this surely indicated that the children weren't perhaps properly prepared for the integration. I think we administrators did a reasonably good job of preparing the community That is, the superintendent of schools and I and Mr.
With not much time. I mean, you really accomplished this
Yeah.
real quickly, which may be why you didn't have more resistance. But Shirley, what about you? You're on that commission as well. And you have the President of the United States and the Governor of New Jersey saying, Shirley, guide us. Should integration still be something we consider an important goal, or are there better goals?
I think it's an important goal, but I think that those who are involved in it need to be more aware of what the outcome would be. As I said, when I look back on when the schools were integrated, the teachers were not sensitized. I think more so there are workshops, there are more sensitive teachers, and the times have changed. So I think it would work more now than it did when we were coming up. But you have to also understand that we're in a town that was segregated. So it was a different aura, it was a different feeling. Everything was segregated. We're talking about just schools at this time.
Shirley Satterfield, Chester Stroup, you have lived a piece of history. We are grateful that you came and shared it with us today. But where does desegregation in Princeton fit in the bigger picture of race in school, in this state and across the country? Could New Jersey schools really be among the nation's most segregated? Raymond with some answers from some state and national experts when we come back. It's a sobering picture of what some are calling resegregation. So stay with us.
Segregation's terrible. It's like everybody should be treated equally and everything. And if people still think about segregation today, they're just really stupid. You should leave them alone.
You know how whites and blacks, we're in one school, but teachers are making it seem like it's still segregated.
My kids are in high school, and it sounds like accelerated class are mostly Caucasian and Asian kids, and Latino and Black kids, they might not have the opportunity.
At least we know the teachers are equal. But it seems to be like Black people are still hanging together and white people are still hanging together. I mean, you have your mix once in a while, but it's still. But at least everybody gets the same teachers and everything. There's no poorer teachers for the Black community.
I think it's probably backslid a great deal because of residential living patterns and such. So I would say there's probably still a lot more to be done in Princeton and every place.
But how much more? Are New Jersey's schools really the fourth most segregated in the country? A major Harvard study says yes. Erica Frankenberg of the Civil Rights Project at Harvard worked on that study. She's with us from Newark. And here in Trenton, David Chiara, Executive Director of the Education Law Center, which has spent decades fighting for parity for New Jersey's inner city kids. And finally, William Labrera, named by the governor earlier this year to be his Commissioner of Education, the man responsible for all programs and issues and problems in all of New Jersey's schools. Welcome to all of you. Commissioner, since we've started talking about your problems, let me ask you whether you regard racial imbalance in New Jersey's schools as one of the problems you've got to attack.
Yes, it clearly is. And I think it's one of a long-standing nature. It's probably developed after World War II when there was a change in this state and change in a lot of others from predominantly an urban-centered state to a suburban-centered state, which I think it now is. And
do you have a
with that development came the unfortunate outcome of racially segregated schools.
As our viewers now know from what they've been watching and from your comment, it's clear this has been around a long time as an issue. One might even suggest it's intractable. Do you have a new strategy or a new approach to it?
I don't think it's intractable. I think part of it is to recognize what it is, why it is, and to understand that there are negative consequences and that it interferes in the judgment of a lot of people, myself included, with the full educational experience of young people. And I think we have to continue to work on desegregation. We have to continue to work on ways in which we can integrate our schools so that our young people have the full advantage of learning with and among all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds.
David, one could conclude that looking at the United States Supreme Court and some rulings of our state Supreme Court, that there really isn't a lot of room to attack desegregation as a matter of law in the courts, in the sense that we know that inner cities have, in the Northeast, tended to be minority in the population increasingly, and that the court has said you can't just break up districts as a matter of judicial fiat in order to create a more integrated school setting. Is desegregation dead as a viable legal strategy?
Well, as far as the courts are concerned, we had a little bit of a period under state law. We have strong state law that requires the Commissioner of Education to exercise his power to address racial segregation in the public schools. We had a case in the late 60s in which the court ordered creation of a regional school district to deal with this. The Booker case created the Morris Regional School District. It's the only case of its kind. Unfortunately, in recent years, the courts have seemed to back away. The Englewood case is the prime example, which has been going on for 15, 16 years, where the plaintiffs in that case looked for a regionalization remedy. The prior commissioners really didn't respond to that. There's now talk of a magnet school approach, and the Supreme Court has stepped back a little bit from that kind of an approach. So it's still available.
You mentioned regionalism. Isn't it a fair statement to make that probably the only viable approach to a fairly expeditious breaking up of the patterns of school segregation would be a regional arrangement where you paired schools in a way that maybe didn't reflect traditional ideas of what a school district looked like in New Jersey?
I think that's right. And I think what the Englewood experience tells us is that we've got to have leadership from the state that begins to bring folks together, communities together, to have a conversation around, not just within communities, but also among communities, especially in smaller district areas, about how are we going to deal with achievement gaps, how are we going to deal with concentrations of poverty in schools and concentrations of race in schools, and begin to explore opportunities for regionalization, both to promote segregation, but also to promote better educational outcomes for kids.
Erica, let me ask you this question. You've been looking at this on a national scale. Where does New Jersey's struggle with desegregation fit in the pattern of national desegregation?
Well, historically, New Jersey has had some of the most segregated public schools in the nation. In our study, we find that on several levels, both for Black students and for Latino students, New Jersey ranks number 4th in terms of minority students in 90 to 100% segregated schools. And so clearly almost half of all minority students in New Jersey are going to these schools with heavily minority school populations, which then when linked with concentrated poverty has real damaging educational outcomes.
And this is an accelerating trend, that is, this is continuing at the moment?
For the past 30 years, New Jersey has been holding pretty consistently at the top of the list as far as segregated public schools. During the 1970s, when most other states were actually becoming more integrated, New Jersey, both in terms of Black and Latino segregation, became much more segregated.
So to break what some might hold as a stereotype, New Jersey and New York, northeastern states priding themselves on their liberalism and racial tolerance, have at least become statistically more segregated in the last 30 years.
In fact, the Northeast is the most segregated region of the country. Far out seas to the south are the border regions that had legally mandated segregation 50 years ago. But over half of all minority children in the Northeast go to these 90 to 100% segregated schools.
Now, Harvard has helped to highlight the extent of this problem. Has the Harvard study come up with recommendations that it's made, especially in the Northeast, for an attack on this?
Well, Gary Orfield at the Civil Rights Project has been tracking the level of minority segregation for the past 30, 35 years. But as part of the Civil Rights Project, which he is the co-director of, we also have an advocacy side, which is also looking at policy solutions to these issues, because we're in a different legal and educational climate than we were, 30 and 40 years ago when the Supreme Court was making decisions to integrate the schools.
Let me ask you, Commissioner, whether or not the suggestion David made that comes out of Booker but had been widely discussed, of regionalizing in a state where there's a long, deep political tradition of local control over schools, if regionalism sounds like the best solution to desegregation, Where do you stand on it as a solution?
Well, I don't think regionalization is the answer. I think we have a long tradition of the problems connected with forced regionalization. You mentioned Englewood, and I'm pleased to say that in the past 6 months, we've worked very closely with the Englewood Board of Education, with its now appointed superintendent and the mayor and the council, and that we're opening in September the academies in Englewood, which represent magnet schools that are open to residents of Bergen
define what
County.
a magnet school is.
Sure. Magnet schools are schools that are theme-based and theme-organized, and they're designed in ways to have people move across traditional neighborhoods or traditional town structures to come to schools of choice.
But within a district?
Well, it's usually been within a district. In this case, it's within a county. Because if you understand the situation in Englewood, and it's 30 years that the problems have existed in Englewood, 16 in terms of the legal challenges, what has happened is they've created, and we've supported, and proudly so, these magnet schools in Englewood, and there are 4. And they're going to open this September, and they're integrated racially from students, as a result of students coming from different communities, which was the object. Now, I continue to be a strong believer in public school choice. I've seen in a community like Montclair, where I've worked, which still is the national model for integration of schools, where they've used magnet schools and choice and quality in schools as a way of attracting populations to the schools. It can work. It's very difficult. We believe this is our best chance to make it work in Englewood. And then we begin to surface a model for the whole state, where we can use academies or schools of choice as a way of integrated previously segregated schools.
David, what do you think about the magnet approach as a way of desegregating in New Jersey as a statewide model?
I think we need to look for opportunities where we can show some success.
But that's different from the regionalization idea that you...
Yes, I mean, I think we need to look at both. I don't think we need to give up on regionalization. There are a lot of other reasons for regionalization. We have a lot of small school districts. We have a lot of K-8 districts that send to high school K-12 districts. A lot of those don't make sense on a scale, on an educational or economic sense. So we need to have conversations around regionalization for that purpose. I do think, though, that the shift where we have to go is to have a conversation about poverty. It's concentrations of poverty that affect student achievement.
I want to come back to that and one other thing you said. But Commissioner, could any commissioner of education in the state of New York, in New Jersey, make it a hypothetical, say, I'm for regionalizing the schools of the state to bring about segregation and desegregation and expect to last in the job or accomplish it?
Probably not. I think it is important for me to say, if I didn't make it clear, my position is one of being against forced regionalization. I think you can put incentives together, and you can talk about the benefits of regionalization, and in some cases they are very clear, and you can bring people together, and I think that that's a hopeful strategy. I think we've seen in the last 30 years more of the trouble that results from forced regionalization. And I think if we look at models where we've been successful, those are usually not places where it has been forced. Instead, it has been a community-developed response to what we all know needs to be done. I think that's the hopeful strategy. And so that's the position that we're taking and supporting.
Erica, did Harvard look at forced regionalization as one of the possible issues that could arise in the context of desegregation?
We haven't looked at the issue of regionalization. I'm not sure how many places are doing it that would allow us to study what's happening, but in an area like the Northeast and New Jersey in particular, there's so many small urban districts that have, heavily minority populations, so there aren't enough white students to desegregate the schools. So if the Northeast and New Jersey are going to integrate their schools, they're going to have to create school systems that are going to have white students as well as minority students in them.
Erica, you said something that makes us come to David.
Well, I want to echo that point, because if you look at patterns in New Jersey over the last 20 years, you see counties like Essex County, where are racial minority majority counties now. And the largely white counties are now out on in the western part of New Jersey or along the shore. So it's a very complicated situation in terms of even county. If you look at the issue of racial segregation in counties, there's been there's been a changing dynamic pattern in New Jersey that makes it much more complicated, as Erica points out, in terms of the movement of students, even between districts, in order to promote.
Let me direct you then to an
segregation.
area that you've spent a lot of time dealing with, which is the line of cases that we call Abbott in New Jersey, but represents a larger debate about finance and education. Do you see that as another way of attacking this problem, or are you saying let's forget about desegregation as an objective and talk about equalizing expenditure?
Well, I think what Abbott tends to get, Abbott gets at is the question of what do you do when you concentrate large numbers of poor students in a certain set of schools and districts. So put race aside for a moment, although the Abbott districts, which serve a quarter of New Jersey's public school students, 85% of those students are African American and Latino. Around 70 to 75% are poor. So these are the schools in New Jersey that serve very high concentrations of poor kids and largely minority kids. And the issue in Abbott is, how do we take those schools and districts and begin to bring a level of educational adequacy to those students? That's what Abbott is all about and what the struggle has been about for the last 20 years.
Commissioner, I know that you have a laundry list of issues. In fact, we first met a couple weeks ago at a conference on the achievement gap in New Jersey, sponsored by the Cherry Hill District and Rutgers Camden. In terms of the achievement gap, that is a difference in performance based on race. Is desegregation a necessary tool, or can you forget about the desegregation issue and say, I want to use other strategies to attack the achievement gap?
I don't think you can ever forget about segregation or desegregation as an issue. And clearly all of these issues are intertwined. But I think it is important that we frame all of these issues for the particular parts of the problem that are most acute. In the area of achievement gap, what we see in the achievement gap, the place where it's most prominent, are in racially diverse suburbs. That's where you have the most obvious problem within the community.
So a gap between minority and non-minority students within the same school?
Yes, and often within the same socioeconomic
So
status.
what's the strategy for the achievement gap?
Well, you first have to identify what the levels of achievement are and make sure everybody understands this is not a figment of people's imagination, nor is this easily explained by people from this community or that community or this section of town versus another.
Idea, or the Abbott idea of equalizing expenditures, does that solve it, or do you need more?
Well, you need more. You clearly need resources to help children in areas of high concentrations of poverty. You clearly have to support children in those communities. And prior to Abbott, we had this horrendous gap between the support for children in urban areas and children in suburban areas. We have addressed that, at least with respect to Abbott. Now, what we are dealing with is what is the quality of those educational experiences? Are we using the money well?
I've got a minute left. Could I get from each of you in like 10 seconds what's the key to the future in education, whether desegregation or not?
From me?
Yeah.
I think that clearly we have to find ways of integrating our school populations, not only racially but socioeconomically, because that's the population, that's the world in which children will live. They need to live and learn in that environment.
David, the same thing.
I think it's the opportunity that Abbott places us, which is to rebuild our urban schools and to begin to close the achievement gap between kids in the cities and kids in the suburbs.
Erica, in 10 seconds, the key to the future.
I think we have a lot of problems still ahead of us, and with the new educational plans proposed by Bush, we obviously have a long way to go, but desegregation is still going to be something we need to think about.
Sounds
in new
like
and creative
desegregation
ways.
is the key for you. Sorry to cut you off, but that's it for this special edition of Due Process. With our thanks to our guests, Commissioner Librera, Erica Frankenberg, and David Chiara, to the Princeton Committee of the LDF, and to all of you. For Sandy King and all of us here at Due Process, I'm Raymond Brown. Thanks for watching.
sense the whole world was watching New Jersey in 47. Because New Jersey desegregated its schools, the NAACP could argue, and it argued well, that desegregation of schools was in keeping with the spirit of American democracy. It was in keeping with the spirit of the United States Constitution, and the court could point to New Jersey as an example of a state that voluntarily desegregated its schools, and it did so without racial havoc.
Major funding for due process was made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding was provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual,